Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories, here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. Three in the morning. It's always 3 in the morning when I wake up hearing those sounds again. My new house is over 1,000 miles from Olympic National Park. But still, I still hear them. My wife says they're just nightmares. She wasn't there. She didn't see what I saw that October night. My name is Marcus Grayson. I'm 34 now, and I've been living in Henderson, Nevada for the past 5 years. The dry heat here, the sparse desert landscape, it's the complete opposite of the Pacific Northwest, and that's exactly why I chose it. No towering cedars, no moss-covered everything, no endless green that can hide things. People here think I'm crazy for leaving Washington's beauty for Nevada's emptiness, but they don't understand. Beauty can be a mask for something much darker. I worked as a forest ranger at Olympic National Park for 6 years. 6 years of thinking I knew every trail, every danger, every protocol. I was good at my job. Maybe too good. I had this confidence that came from never losing anyone on my watch, never having a search and rescue go wrong. That confidence almost got me killed. This happened in October 2019. The autumn that year hit the peninsula hard and early. By the second week of October, the temperatures were already dropping into the 30s at night. And the rain. God, the rain. It wasn't the gentle Pacific Northwest mist tourists expect. It was aggressive. Driving sheets that turned the forest floor into a slippery maze of decomposing leaves and hidden roots. The kind of weather that makes even experienced hikers turn back. But Kira Brennan wasn't just any hiker. I remember the morning her professor called our station. Dr. Elizabeth Chen from Portland State University, voice tight with worry. Kira was one of her graduate students, 23 years old, working on her thesis about old-growth ecosystem recovery patterns. She'd been granted a special research permit to collect samples in the restricted areas of the Hoh River Valley, places where most visitors never go. She was supposed to check in yesterday evening, Dr. Chen told me over the phone. Kira's not careless. She knows the protocols. If she missed her check-in, something's wrong. I took down the details. Kira had been studying a section of old-growth forest about 8 miles up the Hoh River Trail, near an area we called the Cathedral Grove, a stand of ancient cedars and firs that had somehow survived every logging operation. Beautiful place, but remote. Cell service was non-existent, and the nearest road was hours away on foot. The plan was simple. She'd hike in on October 15th, set up a base camp, collect her samples over 2 days, and hike out on the 17th. She had all the right gear: satellite communicator, GPS, cold weather camping equipment. She was supposed to send a check-in message every 12 hours. The last message came through at 6:47 p.m. on October 15th. Base camp established. Weather deteriorating but manageable. Beginning sample collection tomorrow morning. That was 2 days ago. I suited up in full gear. Waterproof everything, emergency medical kit, radio, GPS, backup batteries, emergency beacon. The works. My supervisor, Janet Morrison, wanted to wait for the weather to clear, but I argued against it. Every hour could matter in conditions like these. Hypothermia doesn't wait for convenient weather windows. Take Rodriguez with you, Janet said. Miguel Rodriguez was our newest ranger, 6 months on the job, eager and thorough, but still learning the difference between textbook procedures and reality. The drive to the Hoh River trailhead took 40 minutes in the rain. Miguel was nervous, I could tell by the way he kept checking and rechecking his equipment. "You think she's just holed up somewhere waiting for the storm to pass?" he asked. "Maybe," I said, but I didn't believe it. Something felt wrong. You develop an instinct after enough years in the wilderness. The forest talks to you, tells you when things are off balance. That morning, everything felt displaced. We started up the trail at 8:15 a.m. The Hoh River Trail is one of the most beautiful hikes in the Pacific Northwest under normal circumstances. Massive trees draped in moss, the river running clear and cold beside you, ravens calling from branches that haven't seen direct sunlight in centuries. But that morning it felt like walking through a green tomb. The rain had turned the trail into a muddy channel. Every step was uncertain, and the sound of our boots squelched and echoed strangely in the dense canopy. Miguel had to stop twice in the first hour to clean mud from his boots, and I could see him getting frustrated. "Different from the training scenarios?" I asked. "Everything's so thick," he said, gesturing at the undergrowth. "You can't see more than 20 feet in any direction." He was right. The Olympic Peninsula rainforest is like nowhere else in the continental United States. The biomass is so dense that it creates its own microclimate. Sound behaves differently, sometimes muffled, sometimes amplified in unexpected ways. GPS signals get confused by the canopy. Even experienced hikers get turned around. We made good time despite the conditions, covering the 8 miles to Kira's research area in just under 3 hours. But when we reached the coordinates she'd given in her research permit, there was no sign of her camp. "Maybe she moved inland for better shelter," Miguel suggested, consulting his GPS. We spread out, following a grid search pattern. I went north toward the river. Miguel headed south into the deeper forest. We maintained radio contact, checking in every 5 minutes. That's when I found the first sign. About 200 yards from the original coordinates caught on a Devil's Club bush was a piece of bright blue fabric. The same blue as the rain jacket described in Kira's gear list. "Miguel, I've got something," I radioed. "Fabric sample, coordinates." I rattled off the GPS numbers. "Continue your search pattern, but be aware we may have found her route." The fabric was fresh, no fading, no significant weathering. It had been torn recently, forcefully. The Devil's Club that had caught it was positioned in a way that suggested someone had been moving quickly, maybe not watching where they were going, or running. I followed the direction the fabric suggested, looking for more signs. The forest floor was a carpet of fallen leaves, mostly yellow and brown from the big leaf maples and red alder, mixed with the deep green duff of centuries of decomposed cedar and fir needles. Perfect for hiding tracks, terrible for following them. But I found them anyway. Footprints in a muddy patch beside a fallen log. Small boots, consistent with Kira's size. But there was something wrong with the gait pattern. The prints were spaced too far apart and too deep on the toes. She'd been running. "Marcus, you need to see this." Miguel's voice crackled through the radio with an edge I didn't like. "What's your position?" "About 300 yards southeast of you. I found her camp." I made my way through the undergrowth, following Miguel's GPS coordinates. The rain was getting heavier and the canopy above creaked ominously with the weight of water and wind. When I reached Miguel's position, I understood why his voice had sounded strange. Kira's camp was there all right, but it was wrong. The tent was set up properly, stakes driven deep, guy lines tight. Her research equipment was arranged neatly on a tarp beside the tent. Sample containers, field notebooks in waterproof cases, measuring instruments. Everything looked methodical, organized, exactly what you'd expect from a serious graduate student. But the tent was empty, and the sleeping bag was laid out as if she'd never slept in it. "Her gear's all here," Miguel said. "But look at this." He led me to the tent entrance. The zipper was open, but not all the way, just enough for someone to slip out quickly. And there, in the mud in front of the tent, were those same small boot prints. But beside them, barely visible in the soft earth, was something that made my stomach drop. Larger prints, much larger. A man's boots, size 11 or 12, with an aggressive tread pattern. They approached the tent from the north, stopped directly in front of the entrance, then moved away toward the east, deeper into the forest, with Kira's prints following them. "Miguel," I said quietly. "Radio base. Tell Janet we need backup, and contact the local sheriff's department. We may have an abduction situation." Miguel's face went pale. He fumbled for his radio, but all we got was static. "I'm not getting anything. The weather must be interfering with the signal." I tried my radio, then my emergency beacon. Nothing. In 6 years of working Olympic, I'd never had a complete communication blackout. The equipment was designed to function in exactly these conditions. "Could be the storm," I said, but I didn't believe it. Something was actively wrong here, and it wasn't just weather. We documented the scene as thoroughly as we could with our cameras, taking pictures of the footprints, the camp setup, the gear arrangement. Then we made the decision that probably saved our lives. We decided to follow the tracks immediately, rather than waiting for backup. The trail was easier to follow than I'd expected. The larger boots left deep impressions in the soft earth, and whoever was wearing them wasn't trying to hide their passage. They were heading east, away from the river, into a section of the forest that wasn't on any official trail map. For the first hour, it was almost easy. The tracks led through relatively open forest, around fallen logs and over small streams. Kira's smaller prints were always there too, sometimes beside the larger ones, sometimes directly behind them. She was walking, not being dragged, which gave me hope. But then the trail started to climb. The Olympic Peninsula has terrain that can shift from gentle river valley to steep mountain face in the space of a few hundred yards. We were moving up toward the foothills of the Olympic Mountains, into country that got increasingly wild and remote. And that's when I started to notice we were being watched. It began as just a feeling, that prickle on the back of your neck that every outdoorsman knows. But then I started seeing movement in my peripheral vision, shadows that didn't match the swaying of trees, shapes that vanished when I turned to look directly at them. "Miguel," I said during one of our rest stops, "are you getting the feeling we're not alone out here?" He nodded immediately. I thought it was just my imagination, but yeah, I keep seeing something following us. We were both experienced enough to know the difference between wildlife movement and something else. Bears make noise. Elk crash through underbrush. Deer bound away quickly when they detect humans. This was different, deliberate, intelligent. "Could be Kira," Miguel suggested hopefully. "Maybe she got away and she's trying to approach us?" Maybe. But I was thinking about those boot prints. Size 11 or 12, aggressive tread, not Kira. We pressed on, following the tracks higher into the mountains. The forest was changing around us. Fewer big-leaf maples, more conifers. The understory getting sparser, but the terrain getting more challenging. And all the while, that sensation of being observed. Then around 3 in the afternoon, we lost the trail. The tracks led to a section where a small landslide had recently occurred, probably triggered by the heavy rains. Fresh earth and debris had covered whatever route our quarry had taken, and the ground beyond was too rocky to hold footprints. We spent an hour searching in expanding circles looking for any sign of passage, but found nothing. The trail had vanished as completely as if Kira and her abductor had simply evaporated. "We need to head back," I finally admitted. "Get to higher ground where we can get a radio signal, call for a full search and rescue operation." Miguel looked relieved. The day was getting late, and the temperature was dropping fast. In the Pacific Northwest autumn, darkness comes early and hard, especially in the deep forest. But as we turned to head back down the mountain, I heard something that stopped me cold, a voice calling from deeper in the forest. Faint, almost lost in the sound of wind and rain, but definitely human. "Help. Please. Someone help me." It was a woman's voice. Young. Terrified. Miguel grabbed my arm. "That's got to be Kira." Every protocol I'd ever learned said we should mark our position, return to base for backup, and come back with a full search team. But the voice was so desperate, so immediate. How could we walk away from someone calling for help? We go in fast, we get her, we get out, I decided. 15 minutes maximum. If we can't find her quickly, we retreat and come back with backup. We marked our position with bright orange surveyor's tape and headed toward the voice. The terrain was getting increasingly difficult. Steep slopes covered with wet logs and slippery moss, ravines that appeared suddenly out of the fog. This was old forest, the kind where trees fell centuries ago and newer growth had sprouted on top of them, creating a multi-level landscape that could hide anything. The voice called again, closer now. "Please, I'm hurt. I can't move." We were maybe 100 yards from the source when Miguel stopped suddenly. "Marcus," he whispered, "something's not right." "What do you mean?" "Listen to the voice. Really listen." I stopped moving, focused entirely on the sound. The voice called again, and this time I heard what Miguel had noticed. It was too clear, too consistent. In that terrain with that weather, a voice should have been muffled, distorted by wind and trees and distance. But every word was perfectly audible, as if someone were projecting it, as if someone were using it as bait. "We need to leave," I said quietly. "Right now." But as we turned to retreat, I saw movement in the trees ahead of us. A figure, barely visible through the fog and forest, standing motionless about 50 yards away. It was tall, dressed in camouflage that blended perfectly with the forest colors, and it was watching us. The moment I spotted it, it moved. Not toward us, but parallel to our position, matching our pace as we tried to retreat, staying just visible enough to let us know it was there. "Miguel, don't look back, but we're being followed. When I say run, you head straight downhill toward the river. Don't stop for anything." "What about you?" "I'll be right behind you. On 3. 1, 2. The figure in the trees suddenly raised something to its shoulder, something long and dark. "Run!" We crashed through the forest, abandoning any attempt at stealth. Behind us, I heard the crack of a rifle, and a tree trunk beside my head exploded in a shower of bark and splinters. Miguel was ahead of me, bounding down the slope like a deer, his training finally kicking in. But I could hear pursuit behind us, heavy boots moving fast through the undergrowth, not bothering to be quiet anymore. Another rifle shot and Miguel stumbled. For a terrible moment I thought he'd been hit, but he kept moving. The shot had been aimed to miss, to hurt us. We were being driven somewhere specific. The realization hit me just as we broke out of the thick forest into a small clearing. Miguel was already across it, heading for the trees on the far side, when I saw the trap. The clearing wasn't natural. The trees had been cut recently, and the stumps were arranged in a pattern. A killing ground with clear lines of sight from multiple directions. "Miguel, stop!" I shouted, but he was already committed, already in the open. The shot came from our left, from a position I hadn't even considered. Miguel went down hard, clutching his leg, screaming. I dove for cover behind a fallen log as 2 more shots splintered the wood above my head. Whoever was shooting was good, very good, military trained from the sound of it. The shots were spaced, deliberate, designed to pin me down rather than kill me immediately. "Miguel," I called, "how bad are you hit?" "Leg," he gasped back. "I can't move it." He was lying in the middle of the clearing, completely exposed. Any attempt to reach him would put me in the open as well. That's when I heard the voice again. But this time, it wasn't calling for help. "Marcus Grayson, right?" The voice was male, calm, conversational. It seemed to come from multiple directions at once. 6 years with the National Park Service, 43 successful search and rescue operations, 0 fatalities on your watch. How did he know my name? My record? "Until today," the voice continued. "Today that perfect record comes to an end." I pressed myself lower behind the log, trying to pinpoint the source of the voice. But it was impossible. The acoustics of the clearing made it seem like it was coming from everywhere at once. "Who are you?" I called back. "What do you want?" A laugh echoed through the trees. "What I want is what I've always wanted. A challenge. Do you know how boring it gets hunting deer, elk? Animals are predictable. They follow instinct. But humans can think, they can plan, they can surprise you." Miguel was trying to drag himself toward the edge of the clearing, leaving a trail of blood in the wet leaves. Another shot kicked up dirt inches from his hand, and he stopped moving. "The girl was entertaining for a while," the voice continued. "Smart girl. Graduate student, right? She lasted almost 2 days before she made a mistake." "Where is she?" I demanded. "Close, very close. In fact, if you're smart, and your record suggests you are, you might be able to save her, but you'll have to come get her." "And if I don't?" "Then your partner dies right now, and the girl dies slowly over the next few days. I've gotten quite good at making it last." I closed my eyes, trying to think. 6 years of training, 6 years of protocols, and none of it had prepared me for this. We were dealing with someone who knew the forest as well as I did, who had military-level shooting skills, and who had been planning this encounter. "What are the rules?" I asked. "Simple. You come find the girl. I try to stop you. If you succeed, all three of you walk out of here. If you fail, well, let's just say I'll be adding some interesting items to my collection." Collection. The word sent ice through my veins. "How do I know you'll keep your word?" "You don't. But you also don't have a choice." Miguel was looking at me from across the clearing, his face pale with shock and pain. He mouthed something I couldn't make out, then pointed frantically toward the trees behind me. I spun around just in time to see a figure in camouflage emerging from the forest about 30 yards away. Tall, lean, moving with the fluid grace of someone completely at home in the wilderness. He was carrying a rifle, looked like a military-issue M24 sniper rifle, and he was smiling. "10 seconds to decide, Ranger Grayson," he called. "Save the girl, or watch your partner bleed out." The man looked to be in his 40s, with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that comes from years of outdoor living. But it was his eyes that made my blood freeze. They were completely calm, almost bored, as if this were just another day at the office. "Clock's ticking," he said. I made my decision. "All right," I called back. "I'll play your game. But first I need to know Miguel's going to live." "Fair enough." The man shouldered his rifle and walked casually across the clearing to where Miguel lay. Miguel tried to crawl away, but the man grabbed him by the collar and dragged him to the edge of the clearing like he weighed nothing. "Flesh wound," he announced after a quick examination. "Missed the femoral artery. He'll live if he doesn't go into shock." He pulled out a field dressing and tossed it to Miguel. "Apply pressure. Don't try to be a hero." Then he turned back to me. "The girl is about half a mile northeast of here. There's a cave system in the rocks above the tree line. She's in there. You have until midnight to find her." I checked my watch. It was 4:30 p.m. In the Pacific Northwest in October. Full darkness would fall by 6 mo. That gave me 90 minutes of daylight and 6.5 hours of darkness to navigate unfamiliar terrain and find someone who might already be dead. "And you'll be hunting me the whole time." "Of course, but I'm going to give you a sporting chance." He reached into his pack and pulled out a radio. "We'll stay in communication. I'll even give you hints if you get too far off track. Can't have the game ending too quickly." He tossed the radio to me. It landed in the mud at my feet. "Channel 7, and Marcus, don't disappoint me. I've been looking forward to this for a long time." Then he melted back into the forest as silently as he'd appeared. I grabbed the radio and crawled over to Miguel. His face was gray with pain, but he was conscious and alert. "Marcus, don't do this," he whispered. "It's a trap. Get out of here and bring back help. Help is hours away, and you know it. By the time I get down to the trailhead and back with backup, you'll be dead and Kira will be—" I couldn't finish the sentence. Miguel grabbed my arm. "This guy's not just some crazy hunter. He knows things about us. Our names, our records. He's been planning this." He was right, but it didn't change anything. I couldn't abandon them. I left Miguel with my emergency medical kit and most of my food and water. He was tucked into a sheltered spot where he'd be hidden from casual observation. But I knew that if this went badly, our hunter would find him eventually. The radio crackled to life as I headed northeast. "Smart choice, Marcus. I'd have been disappointed if you'd run away." "How long have you been watching us?" I asked into the radio. "Since you left the trailhead this morning. Actually, longer than that. I've been monitoring park communications for weeks, waiting for the right opportunity. When the Brennan girl went missing, I knew it was perfect. A beautiful damsel in distress, and eventually a knight in shining armor would come to save her. You killed her, didn't you? Now, Marcus, that would spoil the surprise. You'll find out soon enough." The terrain was getting steeper as I climbed toward the tree line. The forest was thinning out, big conifers giving way to smaller, hardier trees, and eventually to rock and alpine vegetation. The rain had turned to sleet, and my breath was visible in the cold air. I was also completely lost. My GPS was showing my position accurately, but the terrain around me didn't match what was on the digital map. Trails that should have been there weren't. Rock formations were in the wrong places. It was as if the mountain itself had been rearranged. Having navigation trouble? The voice crackled through the radio. The GPS doesn't match the terrain. Oh, that's because you're not using the right map. The Park Service maps are useless up here. This area hasn't been properly surveyed in decades. How do you know it so well? I've been living up here for 3 years, ever since I got tired of civilization. Amazing what you can learn about a place when you have time to really explore it. 3 years. He'd been living illegally in the park for 3 years, and somehow we'd never detected him. That level of wilderness skill suggested serious training. Military? I asked. Army Rangers. 2 tours in Afghanistan. Got very good at finding people who didn't want to be found. Also got very good at not being found myself. That explained the shooting skills and the tactical thinking, but it didn't explain why he'd gone from hunting insurgents to hunting innocent civilians. What happened to you? What happened to me? There was genuine surprise in his voice. Nothing happened to me, Marcus. This is who I always was. The Army just gave me useful skills and a legal outlet for my interests. When that ended, I had to find other opportunities. The casual way he said it made my skin crawl. This wasn't someone who'd snapped under pressure or been driven insane by trauma. This was someone who enjoyed killing and who'd found a perfect hunting ground in the remote wilderness of Olympic National Park. I was climbing through increasingly rocky terrain now, following what might have been a game trail through stunted trees and patches of alpine vegetation. The sleet was getting heavier, and my hands were starting to go numb despite my gloves. Getting close now, the radio announced. Maybe 200 yards to go. Can you feel it? I stopped moving and listened. At first, all I could hear was the wind and the sound of sleet hitting the rocks. But then, barely audible, I heard something else, a voice, singing. It was so faint I almost missed it, but it was definitely there. A woman's voice, singing something that sounded like a lullaby. The melody was beautiful and heartbreaking, echoing off the rocks in a way that made it impossible to pinpoint the source. Found her, I said into the radio. Excellent. Now the question is, can you get to her before I get to you? I looked around carefully, studying the terrain. The singing seemed to be coming from above me, somewhere in the rock formations that crowned this section of the mountain. There were several possible routes up, a direct climb over loose scree, a longer route that switched back and forth through the rocks, and what looked like a chimney formation that might lead straight to the caves. Each route had advantages and disadvantages. The direct route was fastest, but would leave me completely exposed. The switchback route offered more cover but would take much longer. The chimney might be a trap. I chose the switchbacks. Moving as quietly as possible, I worked my way up through the rocks. The singing continued, sometimes louder, sometimes fading to almost nothing. It was definitely Kira. I could tell from the tone and pitch that it was a young woman's voice. But there was something strange about it, something that didn't sound quite right. Halfway up the rock face, I found the first sign of the hunter's presence. A piece of 550 cord, military-grade paracord, had been stretched across the trail at ankle height. Almost invisible in the dim light, positioned perfectly to send a climber tumbling down the rocks. I stepped over it carefully and continued climbing. The radio crackled. Very good, Marcus. Most people would have missed that. How many others have you done this to? You're the first ranger, but there have been others. Hikers who got too far off the beaten path, hunters who wandered into my territory, a few other graduate students over the years. Jesus Christ. Oh, don't be so dramatic. Think of it as natural selection. The forest has always been dangerous. I'm just part of that danger now. I was close to the source of the singing now. The rock formations above me had opened into what looked like a natural amphitheater, with several cave openings visible in the walls. The sound was echoing strangely, making it impossible to tell which cave the voice was coming from. Kira, I called. Kira, can you hear me? The singing stopped abruptly. Then, from one of the caves, I heard a response. Help me! Please, someone help me! It was the same voice I'd heard earlier, when we'd first been lured into the trap. But now, hearing it clearly, I could tell it wasn't quite right. The inflection was off. The emotion forced. Kira, is that you? Yes, I'm hurt. I can't move. I approached the cave mouth slowly, my flashlight ready. The opening was about 6 feet high and narrow, leading back into darkness. Just inside the entrance, I could see scattered gear, a backpack, some camping equipment, what looked like research materials. Kira, I'm a park ranger. I'm going to come in and get you out of there. Hurry! He said he's coming back. Every instinct I had was screaming that this was wrong. The voice was coming from too deep in the cave. The gear was arranged too neatly. And there was a smell coming from the cave that I recognized but didn't want to acknowledge. The smell of death. I keyed the radio. She's in the cave. Is she now? The hunter's voice was amused. Are you sure about that? I stepped into the cave mouth and immediately knew I'd made a terrible mistake. The voice hadn't been coming from a person. Mounted on the cave wall about 10 feet back from the entrance was a small electronic device, a digital recorder with a speaker playing Kira's voice on a loop. And scattered around the cave floor were bones, human bones. I spun around to run, but the hunter was already there, silhouetted against the cave entrance. He was no longer carrying the rifle. Instead, he had a large hunting knife in his hand. Welcome to my workshop, Marcus, he said conversationally. I've been using this cave for quite some time, as you can see. In the beam of my flashlight, I could make out more details of the cave's contents. Backpacks and camping gear arranged along the walls, personal items that had belonged to the hunter's previous victims, and everywhere bones. Where is she? I demanded. Where's Kira? Oh, she's here. She's been here for 2 days. But I'm afraid she's not in any condition to be rescued. He gestured deeper into the cave with his knife. She lasted longer than most. Very determined young lady. Kept trying to escape right up until the end. The rage that hit me then was like nothing I'd ever experienced. This wasn't just a predator. This was someone who took pleasure in causing suffering, who collected trophies from his victims like some kind of demented museum curator. I charged him. It was stupid, tactically unsound, and exactly what he was expecting. He sidestepped my rush easily and slashed out with the knife, opening a long cut across my forearm. I stumbled past him and crashed into the cave wall. Now, Marcus. That's not how the game is played. You're supposed to be smarter than that. I scrambled to my feet, blood running down my arm. The cut wasn't deep, but it was painful and it was bleeding freely. In the confined space of the cave, I was at a severe disadvantage against someone with a knife. Tell me something, the hunter said, advancing slowly. In all your years as a ranger, how many people did you actually save? I mean really save. From genuine danger? What? I'm curious. Because most of your rescues were probably just tourists who got a little lost or hikers with twisted ankles. Inconveniences, not life or death situations. But today, you have a chance to actually save someone. Your partner down there is bleeding. If you don't get back to him soon, he's going to die. Miguel. In my desperation to find Kira, I'd almost forgotten about Miguel lying wounded in the clearing below. So here's what we're going to do, the hunter continued. You're going to walk out of this cave, you're going to climb down this mountain, and you're going to get your partner medical attention. And in exchange, I'm going to let you live. What about Kira? Kira's already dead, Marcus. Has been for 2 days. I told you that. Prove it. He smiled and gestured toward the back of the cave. Be my guest. I grabbed my flashlight and moved deeper into the cave, keeping my back to the wall and my eyes on the hunter. About 20 feet from the entrance, the cave opened up into a larger chamber. And there, arranged against the far wall, I found them. Bodies. At least 6 that I could see, in various stages of decomposition. Some recent, some much older. All of them showed signs of violence. Knife wounds, broken bones, worse things that I didn't want to examine too closely. And sitting propped against the wall, her research notebook still clutched in her hands, was Kira Brennan. She'd been dead for at least 2 days, just as the hunter had said, but even in death her face showed the terror and pain of her final hours. I turned away, sick. "Satisfied?" the hunter asked. "Now you understand what you're dealing with. This isn't some misunderstanding or crime of passion. This is what I do. This is who I am." "You're insane." "No, Marcus, I'm evolved. Most people spend their whole lives pretending they're not predators, pretending civilization has changed what we fundamentally are. I've just accepted the truth. I was trapped in a cave with a serial killer, surrounded by the remains of his victims, and my partner was bleeding to death miles away. Every protocol, every piece of training I'd ever received had failed me completely. But as I stood there in that charnel house, something changed in my mind. The fear was still there, but it was being overwhelmed by something else. Cold, calculating rage. This man had turned one of the most beautiful places on earth into his personal killing ground. He'd murdered innocent people for sport, and he was planning to let Miguel die and then continue his killing spree with other victims. Not if I could help it. "You're right," I said, moving slowly toward the cave entrance. "You are a predator, but so am I." "Oh?" 6 years as a ranger. Before that, 4 years in the Marines, 2 tours in Iraq. I know how to kill people too. It was true, though I'd never told anyone at the Park Service about my military background. The skills were still there, buried under years of civilian life but ready to surface when needed. "Interesting," the hunter said, "but there's a difference between killing in war and killing for pleasure. You're about to find out." I lunged again, but this time I was ready for his counterattack. When he slashed with the knife, I grabbed his wrist and twisted, using his momentum against him. We went down hard on the cave floor, fighting for control of the weapon. He was strong and skilled, but I had desperation on my side, and I was fighting for more than just my own life. I was fighting for Miguel, for Kira, for all the future victims this monster would claim if I failed. The knife went skittering across the cave floor in our struggle. We rolled over bones and camping gear, each trying to gain the upper hand. He got his hands around my throat and started squeezing, his face inches from mine, those calm eyes still showing no emotion even as he tried to kill me. I brought my knee up hard into his ribs and heard something crack. His grip loosened enough for me to break free and scramble toward where the knife had fallen. But he was right behind me, grabbing my ankle and pulling me back. "You're better than I expected," he gasped. "This is actually fun." I kicked back with my free foot, catching him in the face. Blood spurted from his nose, but he just smiled wider. "See? You do understand. The thrill of the hunt, the rush of violence. We're not so different, you and I. We're nothing alike," I snarled, finally reaching the knife. I spun around and slashed at him. The blade caught him across the chest, opening a shallow cut through his camouflage jacket. He looked down at the blood, then back at me, and for the first time I saw something other than calm amusement in his eyes. Respect. "Very good, Marcus. Very good indeed." He pulled out a backup knife, smaller but wickedly sharp. We circled each other in the confines of the cave like 2 wild animals, both bleeding, both committed to finishing this. That's when we heard the helicopter. The sound of rotor blades echoed off the mountains, distant but getting closer. Someone had finally managed to organize a search and rescue operation. The hunter's expression changed. The calm confidence was replaced by calculation, then by something that might have been panic. "That's not supposed to happen," he muttered. "It's too soon. They shouldn't have found us yet." "Maybe you're not as smart as you think you are," I said. But even as I said it, I knew something was wrong. The helicopter sound was growing louder, but it wasn't moving in a search pattern. It was coming straight toward us. The hunter was listening too, his head tilted like a hunting dog picking up a scent. Suddenly his expression changed to one of fury. "That bitch," he snarled. "She had a backup beacon." "What?" "The girl, Brennan. She must have had a second emergency beacon hidden somewhere. I found one in her pack and destroyed it, but she had another one." Kira had been smarter than any of us had realized. Somewhere on her body she'd hidden a second emergency locator beacon, and it had finally been activated, probably triggered automatically when her vital signs stopped. The cavalry was coming. But the hunter wasn't finished yet. "If I can't have my fun," he said, "then nobody gets to go home." He reached into his pack and pulled out something that made my blood freeze. A hand grenade, military issue, the same kind I'd seen in Iraq. "You're insane," I breathed. "No, I'm thorough." He was going to bring down the whole cave system, burying all the evidence along with both of us. Even if the search and rescue team found this place, they'd never be able to prove what had happened here. I had maybe 10 seconds before he pulled the pin. I threw the knife. It wasn't a perfect throw. I was exhausted, bleeding, and operating on pure adrenaline. But it was good enough. The blade caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around and making him drop the grenade. The grenade rolled across the uneven cave floor, pin still intact, coming to rest against one of the skulls scattered around the chamber. We both dove for it at the same time. I got there first, but he landed on top of me, driving his elbow into my ribs with enough force to crack bone. I gasped and almost lost my grip on the grenade but managed to hold on. "Let go," he hissed in my ear. "Let go and we'll both die as warriors. Isn't that better than letting the lawyers and the media turn this into a circus?" For a moment I almost understood his logic. Death here, in this place, might be cleaner than what would come after. The investigations, the trials, the media attention, the families of the victims learning exactly what had happened to their loved ones. But then I thought about Miguel, lying wounded in the forest, about my wife waiting for me back home, about all the other potential victims who would never be safe as long as this monster was alive. I rolled over, putting the grenade between us, and grabbed his throat with my free hand. "No," I said. "You don't get to die a warrior. You get to die like what you are, a coward who preys on innocent people." The helicopter was directly overhead now, the sound deafening in the confined space of the cave. Searchlights were sweeping the mountainside, and I could hear voices calling through loudspeakers. The hunter made one last desperate grab for the grenade, but I held on. We struggled for another few seconds, and then something changed in his face. The fury faded, replaced by something that looked almost like disappointment. "You know they'll never believe you," he said quietly. "Not all of it. They'll think you're exaggerating or suffering from trauma-induced delusions. I'll become just another serial killer, just another news story." "Good," I said. "That's exactly what you deserve." He smiled one last time, that same calm, predatory smile I'd seen when he first revealed himself in the clearing. "We'll see about that." Then he bit down hard on something he'd been holding in his mouth. A tooth cracked, and foam began to spill from his lips. Cyanide capsule, just like the spies in old movies. He was dead in less than 30 seconds, his body convulsing once and then going still. His eyes remained open, staring at nothing. I sat there for a long time, holding the grenade, listening to the search teams calling my name from outside the cave. When I finally found the strength to move, I carefully secured the grenade's pin and made my way to the cave entrance. The rescue that followed was a blur. EMTs checking me for injuries, investigators taking statements, crime scene technicians photographing everything in the cave. Miguel was airlifted to Harborview Medical Center in Seattle with a shattered femur but alive. The hunter's body was removed along with the remains of his victims. In the end, they identified 8 victims spanning 3 years, all of them hikers, campers, or researchers who had ventured into the remote areas of Olympic National Park, all of them listed as missing persons, presumed dead due to wilderness accidents. The hunter's real name was Derek Castellanos, former Army Ranger with an exemplary service record until his discharge in 2016. Apparently he'd been living in a series of hidden camps throughout the park, moving seasonally to avoid detection. His military training had made him nearly invisible to standard Park Service patrols. The media did exactly what he'd predicted. They focused on the sensational aspects, the serial killer, the dramatic rescue, the cave full of bones. But they missed the deeper horror of what had really happened. How a place that was supposed to represent nature's beauty and peace had been turned into a hunting ground for human predators. I spent 3 weeks in the hospital being treated for my injuries and undergoing psychological evaluation. The official report listed my experience as acute stress reaction due to life-threatening encounter with armed suspect. Clean, clinical language that completely failed to capture what it's like to fight for your life in a cave full of corpses. Miguel recovered fully, but he transferred to a different park within 6 months. He said he couldn't handle the forest anymore, that every shadow reminded him of that day. I understood completely. I lasted another 8 months before I turned in my resignation. By then, I was having panic attacks every time I entered the woods alone. The sound of wind in the trees reminded me of voices calling for help. Every piece of gear I found on the trail made me think of scattered belongings and abandoned campsites. My wife suggested we move somewhere completely different, somewhere with a different climate and landscape. We chose Nevada because it was the opposite of Washington in every way. Dry instead of wet, open instead of closed, bright instead of dark. But the nightmares followed me anyway. 3 in the morning. Always 3 in the morning when I wake up hearing those sounds again. The voices calling for help, the crack of rifle shots, the echo of footsteps in a cave full of bones. My therapist says the dreams will fade eventually, that trauma memories lose their intensity over time if you process them properly. But some nights lying here in my bed in Henderson, Nevada, 1,000 miles from Olympic National Park, I can still smell the wet forest air and hear Derek Castellanos whispering in my ear, "We're not so different, you and I." Maybe that's what haunts me most. Not the violence or the death or even the horror of that cave, but the moment when I was fighting him for that knife, when something primal and savage awakened in me, and I understood exactly what he meant. I've never told anyone about that moment. Not my wife, not my therapist, not the investigators. It's the one part of the story I keep to myself, because the truth is, for just a few seconds in that cave, I wasn't Marcus Grayson, the park ranger trying to save innocent lives. I was something else. Something that understood the thrill of violence and the satisfaction of dominance. Something that might not be so different from Derek Castellanos after all. That's why I can't go back to the forest. Not because I'm afraid of what might be hiding in the trees, but because I'm afraid of what might be hiding in myself. What that place might awaken again if I let it. I work in security now, for a casino here in Nevada. Safe job, indoor work, lots of people around at all times. No forests, no wilderness, no situations where a person might have to make the kind of choices I made in that cave. But sometimes, late at night when the casino is quiet and I'm walking my rounds through the empty gaming floors, I catch myself thinking about that moment when the knife found its mark. The satisfaction I felt when I saw fear in Derek Castellanos' eyes for the first time. And I wonder if maybe he was right about me. Maybe we really weren't so different after all. The families of the victims got closure at least. Kira Brennan's parents were able to give her a proper burial. The other families too, people who had been wondering for years what happened to their loved ones, finally had answers, even if those answers were painful. The Park Service implemented new safety protocols, better communication systems, mandatory check-ins for anyone venturing into remote areas, increased patrols in the backcountry. They even named the new safety program after Kira, the Brennan Protocol. But I know the truth that they don't want to acknowledge. All the protocols in the world won't stop someone like Derek Castellanos, someone with military training, wilderness expertise, and the patience to plan for years. Someone who understands that the vast wild spaces of America's national parks are perfect hunting grounds for those who know how to use them. How many others are out there? How many other Derek Castellanos living off the grid in remote corners of our most beautiful places, turning them into theaters for their darkest impulses? I don't know, and I don't want to know. That's someone else's job now. Someone who hasn't stood in a cave full of bones and felt their humanity slip away, even for just a moment. Someone who can still believe in the fundamental goodness of people and the safety of wild places. Someone who doesn't wake up at 3 in the morning, sweating and shaking, remembering the sound of a dead man's laughter echoing off stone walls. I'm done with the forest, done with the wilderness, done with places where human beings can disappear without a trace and become nothing more than scattered bones and forgotten belongings. But the forest isn't done with me. It never will be. That's the real horror of what happened in Olympic National Park. Not that monsters exist, we've always known that, but that they can take the most beautiful, peaceful places in the world and turn them into something dark and terrible just by being there. And once you've seen that darkness, once you've been touched by it, you can never go back to seeing the forest the way you did before. Every shadow holds a threat. Every sound might be a call for help, or a lure into a trap. Every peaceful meadow might be hiding the bones of someone who thought they were safe in nature's embrace. I used to believe that the wilderness was pure, that it was only human civilization that was corrupt and dangerous. Now I know better. The real monsters aren't the bears or the mountain lions or the rattlesnakes, they're us. And they're everywhere. Three in the morning. It's always 3 in the morning when I wake up hearing those sounds again. My new house is over 1,000 miles from Olympic National Park, but still, I still hear them. My wife says they're just nightmares. She wasn't there. She didn't see what I saw that October night. My name is Ezra Thorne, and I need to tell someone this story. It's been 3 years since I left my job as a forest ranger and moved here to Vermont. The mountains here are different. Gentler somehow, with their maples and birches instead of those towering Douglas firs and Sitka spruces that seem to swallow sound itself in the Olympic Peninsula. Here, when wind moves through autumn leaves, it rustles. Back there in those ancient rainforests, wind just disappeared into the canopy, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt like being buried alive. I worked as a ranger at Olympic National Park for 6 years. 6 years of thinking I understood the wilderness, thinking I knew what dangers lurked in those 922,000 acres of temperate rainforest, alpine meadows, and rugged coastline. I was wrong. Completely wrong. The bears, the cougars, the unpredictable weather, those weren't the real threats. The real threat walked on 2 legs, thought with human intelligence, and turned my own training against me. This happened in October 2021. The Pacific Northwest autumn comes early and hits hard. By 5 p.m., darkness was already creeping between the massive trunks, and morning fog could persist until noon, creating a world where shapes formed and dissolved like something out of a fever dream. I'd always loved that season in Washington, the way the big leaf maples turned brilliant gold against the evergreen backdrop, how the morning air carried that crisp bite that made everything feel more alive. Now just thinking about October makes my hands shake. The missing person report came in on a Tuesday morning. Callista Vex, 23 years old, graduate student from Portland State University researching old-growth ecosystem dynamics. She'd been conducting fieldwork in the Hoh River area, one of the most remote sections of the park, where some trees have been standing for over 1,000 years. Her advisor hadn't heard from her in 4 days, which was unusual. Callista was methodical, responsible. She followed protocols. I remember looking at her photo that morning. Short auburn hair, serious green eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. The kind of focused intensity you see in people who genuinely care about their work. She was supposed to check in every 48 hours via satellite phone. The last communication had been Friday evening. All good, data collection proceeding as planned, weather holding. Then nothing. I'd handled dozens of missing person cases over the years, usually hikers who'd overestimated their abilities or underestimated the terrain. Olympic could be unforgiving, sudden weather changes, easy to get turned around in the dense forest, creek beds that could turn into torrents without warning. But Callista wasn't some weekend warrior. She'd been working in these forests for her thesis research for 8 months. She knew the area. My supervisor, Janet Reeves, assigned me as lead on the case. "Take Morrison with you for backup," she said, referring to Kyle Morrison, a newer ranger who'd transferred from Yellowstone the previous spring. "Kid's eager to prove himself, and you could use the extra eyes." I should have been more careful about that phrasing. We started our search Wednesday morning at the Hoh River trailhead, where Callista's Honda Civic was still parked, looking almost abandoned with 4 days of fallen leaves scattered across the windshield. Pacific Northwest October has this particular quality to its light. Filtered through perpetual overcast, everything takes on a muted, almost underwater appearance. The massive Sitka spruces and western hemlocks create a canopy so dense that even at midday, you're walking through a kind of permanent twilight. Morrison seemed excited about his first major search operation. He was 26, built like he'd played college football, with that eager energy of someone still trying to prove he belonged. He kept checking his equipment, GPS unit, radio, emergency beacon, first aid kit, talking through procedures like he was studying for an exam. "Standard search pattern, right?" he asked as we shouldered our packs. "Quarter-mile grid, mark and photograph any evidence, regular radio check-ins every 30 minutes?" "That's the protocol," I confirmed, though something was already nagging at me. Call it intuition, call it 6 years of experience, but the forest felt wrong. Too quiet. Even for the Hoh rainforest, which was naturally hushed by its own density, this felt different. Unnatural. We followed Callista's most likely route toward her research sites, a network of permanent study plots she'd established deeper in the old-growth forest. The trail was well maintained for the first 2 miles, then branched into smaller paths that most visitors never explored. This was where the real Olympic wilderness began, where you could walk for days without seeing another human being. About 3 miles in, we found the first sign. Morrison spotted it, a bright orange survey flag tied to a Douglas fir about 8 feet off the ground. "That's not Park Service," he said, and he was right. Our markers were different, and this flag was tied too high, like someone had been trying to make it visible from a distance. I photographed it, took GPS coordinates, and we continued. Standard procedure. But that flag bothered me in a way I couldn't articulate. It felt deliberate, not like something a researcher would use. The next sign came an hour later, a section of trail where the ground was disturbed, leaves scattered in an unnatural pattern. Morrison knelt down, studying the marks like he'd been trained to do. "Looks like something was dragged here," he said. "Maybe she fell, injured herself?" I examined the area more carefully. The disturbance was too clean, too purposeful. If someone had fallen and injured themselves badly enough to need dragging, there would be blood, torn clothing, signs of struggle. This looked more like staging. That's when my radio crackled with static. "Base to Unit 7, come in." I keyed the mic. "Unit 7 here, go ahead, Janet." "Any sign of our missing person?" "Negative so far. Found some markers that might be related to her research. Continuing search pattern." "Copy that. Weather Service is calling for possible storm front moving in tonight. Be advised." The static was heavier than usual, with an odd rhythmic quality I'd never heard before. I made a mental note to check the radio later. We pushed deeper into the forest, following what appeared to be Callista's research route. The old-growth forest here was primordial. Some of these trees had been seedlings when Columbus landed in the New World. Walking among them felt like being inside a living cathedral, with columns of bark stretching up into a canopy so high and dense it seemed to swallow light itself. It was Morrison who found the backpack. "Ezra, over here." He was standing beside a massive western red cedar, pointing to a blue backpack caught on some devil's club about 20 yards off the main trail. My stomach tightened as I recognized it from the description. Callista's research pack. We approached carefully, documenting everything. The pack was intact but had been opened, contents scattered. Field notebooks, soil sampling equipment, a half-eaten energy bar. Her satellite phone was missing, but her regular cell phone was there, screen cracked like it had been dropped. "Why would she abandon her pack?" Morrison asked. That was the question. In wilderness survival, your pack is your lifeline. No experienced person abandons their gear unless they're running from something immediate and deadly. I was photographing the scene when I heard it, a sound that made every hair on my neck stand up. A voice, distant but clear, calling through the forest. "Help me, please, someone help me." Morrison's head snapped up. "That's her, that's gotta be Callista." The voice came again from deeper in the forest, beyond where the light from our position could penetrate. It sounded young, female, desperate. Help! I'm hurt! Please! Morrison was already moving toward the sound, but I grabbed his arm. Something was wrong. The voice was too clear, too projected. Sound doesn't carry that way in dense forest. It gets absorbed, muffled. This voice had the clarity of someone speaking into a microphone. "Hold on," I said. "We need to call this in first." But when I keyed my radio, all I got was static. Heavy, rhythmic static that seemed to pulse with an almost organic rhythm. "Base, this is Unit 7, do you copy?" Nothing but that strange static. "Ezra, we have to go to her," Morrison said, his voice tight with urgency. "She's hurt." The voice came again. "Please, I can't move, help me." Against every instinct I developed in 6 years of wilderness work, I nodded. We marked our position with GPS and began moving toward the voice, using our flashlights to penetrate the deepening shadows between the trees. The forest seemed to close around us as we moved deeper. The canopy above was so thick that our lights created only small circles of visibility, leaving everything beyond arm's reach lost in absolute darkness. The ground became increasingly uneven, covered with fallen logs and thick moss that muffled our footsteps. "Help! Over here!" The voice was closer now, maybe 50 yards ahead, but something about it was bothering me more and more. It sounded repeated, like the same inflection, the same desperation, played back exactly the same way each time. We came to a small clearing where a massive Sitka spruce had fallen sometime in the distant past, creating a gap in the canopy where pale October light filtered down. And there, at the far edge of the clearing, we saw her. A young woman was sitting against a tree, one leg extended at an unnatural angle. Auburn hair, wire-rimmed glasses hanging askew. She raised her hand weakly when our lights found her. "Thank God," she called out. "I've been here since yesterday. I think my leg is broken." Morrison started toward her immediately, but I hung back. Something was wrong with the scene, wrong in a way that made my mouth go dry and my hands start to shake. The woman looked exactly like Callista's photo. Exactly, down to the clothing described in the missing person report. But her voice was different when she spoke normally, deeper, less refined than the desperate calls we'd been hearing. And there was something about her posture, the way she held herself, that seemed practiced. "Morrison, wait," I said quietly. But he was already kneeling beside her, pulling out his first aid kit. "Ma'am, I'm Kyle Morrison with the National Park Service. We've been looking for you. Can you tell me your name?" "Callista," she said. "Callista Vex. Thank you for finding me." I stayed back, playing my flashlight around the clearing. Something glinted in the moss about 10 feet to my left, metal reflecting light. I moved closer and felt my blood turn to ice water. It was a satellite phone. Callista's satellite phone, based on the description we'd been given. But if this was really Callista, why was her phone over here while she was over there? "Morrison," I called out quietly. "We need to go. Now." "What?" "She needs medical attention. Her leg is—" "Morrison, that's not her." The woman, whoever she was, turned to look at me with eyes that had gone completely cold. In that moment, her entire demeanor changed. The helpless victim act dropped away like a shed skin, replaced by something calculating and predatory. "Smart man," she said, and her voice was different now. Deeper, male. Morrison looked confused, still kneeling beside her. "What are you talking about? This is obviously—" The woman moved faster than should have been possible with a supposedly broken leg. One moment she was sitting helplessly against the tree, the next she had something in her hand, a syringe, and was driving it toward Morrison's neck. I shouted a warning and lunged forward, but I was too far away. The needle went into Morrison's neck and he jerked back, eyes wide with shock and confusion. "What the hell?" he started to say. Then his words became slurred, his movements uncoordinated. The woman stood up, no longer favoring her supposedly injured leg. In the beam of my flashlight, I could see what I'd missed before, the subtle wrongness of the disguise. The wig slightly askew, makeup that didn't quite match the skin tone underneath, clothes that were too large, padding that created the illusion of a different body type. "You're not Callista," I said, backing away slowly. Very observant. The voice was definitely male now, and there was something familiar about it. Callista was much more trusting. She didn't figure it out until it was far too late. Morrison was swaying on his knees, fighting the effects of whatever drug he'd been injected with. "Ezra, what's happening? I can't think straight." 3 years I've been perfecting this," the man said, pulling off the wig to reveal close-cropped military-style hair. 3 years of studying park procedures, ranger protocols, emergency response patterns. You people are so predictable." I recognized him now. Damien Korsh. He'd been a person of interest in several missing person cases across different national parks, but there had never been enough evidence. Military background, special forces training, expert in survival and psychological warfare. "Where is Callista?" I demanded. "Callista served her purpose," he said calmly, "just like your friend here will serve his." Morrison collapsed onto his side, conscious but unable to coordinate his movements. Korsh kicked him casually in the ribs, and Morrison groaned. "The beauty of this location," Korsh continued, "is how isolated it is. No cell service, radio communications spotty at best. I've been jamming your frequencies for the last hour. No one's coming to help you." That explained the strange static on the radio. He'd been controlling our communications, isolating us. "What do you want?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew. "What I've always wanted. The hunt." His smile was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. "I spent 8 years in special forces, hunting insurgents in Afghanistan, Iraq. Nothing else compares to that rush, the perfect predator-prey relationship. But hunting civilians got boring fast. No training, no survival instincts, no challenge." He gestured around the dark forest. "But park rangers, you have training, skills. You know the terrain, you understand survival. You make it interesting." My hand moved slowly toward the bear spray on my belt, but Korsh noticed immediately. "I wouldn't. I have night vision equipment, and I know these woods better than you do. I've been living in them for 2 years, learning every trail, every hiding place, every way in and out." To prove his point, he pulled out what looked like military-grade night vision goggles and slipped them on. "I can see you perfectly, but you're operating blind." I realized with growing horror that this had all been planned. The missing person report, the planted evidence, the staged rescue scene, all of it designed to get park rangers out here, isolated and vulnerable. "How many?" I asked. "How many what?" "How many people have you killed?" His smile widened. "You'd be surprised how many people go missing in national parks every year. Hundreds. And how many of those cases get solved? Not many. The wilderness is the perfect hunting ground, vast, isolated, and when someone disappears, everyone assumes it was an accident." Morrison groaned and tried to push himself up, but his muscles weren't responding properly. "The drug will wear off in about 6 hours, Korsh said, assuming he lives that long. But he won't. Neither will you. The official report will say you got lost during the search operation, probably fell into a ravine or got attacked by wildlife. Very tragic. Very believable." He started backing away into the darkness beyond our flashlight beams. "I'm going to give you a 5-minute head start. Then the hunt begins. Try to make it interesting." And then he was gone, vanished into the forest like he'd never been there. I rushed to Morrison, who was barely conscious. The drug had left him unable to walk, but still aware of what was happening, maybe the cruelest part of Korsh's plan. "Can you hear me?" I whispered. "Yeah," he slurred. Can't move right." I quickly assessed our situation. We were at least 3 miles from the trailhead, surrounded by dense forest with no working radio communication. Morrison was incapacitated, and we were being hunted by someone with military training and night vision equipment. Our only advantages were my knowledge of park emergency procedures and the fact that Korsh wanted to hunt us, not just kill us outright. That gave us time, but not much. I hoisted Morrison up, getting his arm around my shoulders. He was dead weight, maybe 180 pounds of mostly unconscious ranger that I had to somehow get back to safety. "We have to move," I told him. "Can you try to help at all?" "Trying," he mumbled. We started moving, but our progress was agonizingly slow. Morrison's legs weren't working properly, so I was essentially carrying him through terrain that was difficult even under normal circumstances. Fallen logs, thick underbrush, moss-covered rocks that could turn an ankle. Every step was treacherous. After what felt like an hour but was probably only 10 minutes, I heard Korsh's voice echoing through the forest behind us. "Time's up." The hunt had begun. I tried to move faster, but Morrison was getting heavier as the drug hit him harder. His head lolled against my shoulder and his breathing was becoming more labored. "Stay with me," I whispered. "Don't pass out on me." That's when I heard the first shot. Not aimed at us. It impacted a tree about 20 feet to our left, sending bark flying. A warning shot, or maybe just Korsh playing with us. Either way, it meant he'd found our trail. Military training includes tracking, and I was leaving plenty of sign. Broken branches where I'd pushed through, disturbed moss, probably even drops of sweat. Morrison and I together were making noise that would be audible from 100 yards away in the forest quiet. I changed direction, angling toward a part of the forest I knew had thicker canopy cover. If Korsh was using night vision, I needed to get us somewhere with less ambient light for his equipment to amplify. Another shot, closer this time. The bullet whined off a rock somewhere in the darkness ahead of us. "He's playing with us," Morrison mumbled, briefly coherent. He was right. Korsh could have killed us already if he'd wanted to. This was about the experience for him, the thrill of the hunt. We were prey animals being toyed with by a predator who wanted to savor every moment. That realization gave me an idea. If Korsh wanted to play games, maybe I could use that against him. I found a thick cluster of old-growth trees where the canopy was so dense it created almost complete darkness, and carefully lowered Morrison to the ground behind a massive fallen log. "I'm going to try something," I whispered. "Stay quiet no matter what happens." I pulled out my backup flashlight and my emergency whistle. Then I moved about 50 yards away from Morrison's position and started making noise, breaking branches, calling out like I was lost and panicked. "Help, Morrison, where are you? I think I'm lost." I clicked the flashlight on and off rapidly, creating flashes of light that would be visible through the night vision, but wouldn't provide sustained illumination. The idea was to draw Korsh away from Morrison's position while making myself seem like easier prey. It worked. I heard movement in the forest, getting closer to my position. Korsh was stalking me, probably enjoying what looked like panic and disorientation. I kept moving, leading him further away from Morrison, making enough noise to maintain his attention, but not so much that it seemed obviously fake. This was the most dangerous game I'd ever played, using myself as bait to protect an incapacitated partner. "Getting warmer," Korsh called out from somewhere in the darkness. "You're making this too easy, Ranger Thorn." He knew my name. That shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. It meant he'd been studying us, learning about the rangers who worked this area. This wasn't random. It was personal. I clicked my flashlight again and immediately moved to a new position. Through the trees, I caught a glimpse of reflected light, his night vision goggles picking up my signal. "You know, I've been watching you for months." His voice came from a different direction now. He was trying to confuse me about his position. "Learning your routines, your patrol patterns. You're very methodical, very by the book. That's going to get you killed." I kept moving, trying to put more distance between him and Morrison. But the forest was working against me. Every branch that caught my clothes, every root that threatened to trip me, was making noise that gave away my position. Another shot, this one close enough that I felt the bullet pass by my head. A near miss that was probably intentional, Korsh demonstrating that he could kill me anytime he wanted. "You can't keep this up forever," he called out. "You're getting tired making mistakes. And your friend back there? How long do you think he can survive without medical attention?" He was right. Morrison needed help, and I was burning energy I couldn't afford to lose. But what choice did I have? That's when I heard something that made my blood freeze. Morrison, calling out from his hiding spot. "Ezra, help me. Something's wrong." I'd been played. While I was leading Korsh away from Morrison, someone, or something, had found him. But that was impossible. Korsh was right here, stalking me, unless he wasn't working alone. Surprise! Korsh's voice came from right behind me. I spun around, but he wasn't there. The voice had come from a small speaker device attached to a tree about 6 feet away. He'd been using technology to throw his voice, to confuse me about his real position. While I'd been chasing shadows and recorded messages, he'd doubled back to Morrison. I ran toward Morrison's position, crashing through underbrush, no longer caring about stealth. When I reached the fallen log where I'd left him, Morrison was gone. In his place was a note, written on Park Service letterhead in block letters. "The real hunt starts now. Your friend has maybe 2 hours before the drug causes permanent damage. Find us if you can. But remember, you're not the hunter anymore. You're the prey." Below that was a crude map showing a location deeper in the forest, near an area I knew was riddled with caves and rocky outcroppings. Perfect terrain for someone who wanted to set traps and ambushes. I checked my watch. It was past midnight. We'd been out here for hours, and Morrison had been drugged for at least 2 of them. If Korsh was telling the truth about the drug's effects, time was running out. I had a choice. Try to hike back to the trailhead and get help, or follow Korsh's map deeper into the wilderness. Getting help was the smart, by-the-book decision, but Morrison would be dead before I could return with backup, assuming I could even make it out alive. I studied the map again. The location was about 2 miles deeper into the forest, in an area I'd only patrolled a few times. Rocky terrain, lots of caves, easy to get lost even in daylight. At night, it would be a maze. But Morrison was my responsibility, my partner. I couldn't abandon him. I started moving toward the location on the map, using my GPS to navigate but keeping the screen dimmed to avoid giving away my position. The forest seemed to get denser and more hostile with every step. Branches grabbed at my clothes, roots tried to trip me, and every shadow looked like it might be hiding a threat. The temperature was dropping too. That bone-deep October cold that comes when the sun disappears and the Northwest's perpetual moisture starts pulling heat from your body. My hands were getting numb, making it harder to operate equipment. About a mile from the location on the map, I started hearing sounds. At first, I thought it might be Morrison, groaning, maybe calling for help. But as I got closer, I realized the sounds were too regular, too rhythmic, like a recording being played on loop. Korsh was still playing games, still trying to manipulate me, but this time I was ready for it. I approached the sound source carefully, using every bit of stealth training I'd learned in Ranger School. The sounds were coming from a small clearing where several large boulders formed natural walls and hiding places. In the center of the clearing, a small speaker was zip-tied to a branch, playing what sounded like Morrison in distress. But Morrison himself wasn't there. I was studying the speaker when I heard Korsh's voice, close enough that he had to be within 20 feet. "You're learning. Good. This might actually be interesting." I spun around, trying to locate him, but the voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. He was using the terrain and his equipment to stay invisible while taunting me. "Where is Morrison?" I called out. "Close, very close. But you'll have to earn him back. What do you want?" "I want you to understand what it feels like to be completely helpless. To know that everything you've trained for, everything you think you know about survival means nothing when you're up against a superior opponent." A laser dot appeared on my chest. Not from a weapon, but from a laser pointer. He was demonstrating that he had me in his sights, that he could have killed me at any moment. "Drop your equipment," he ordered. "All of it. Radio, GPS, flashlights, bear spray, first aid kit. Everything." I hesitated. Without equipment, I'd be completely vulnerable. "Do it now, or I put a bullet in your partner's kneecap." From somewhere in the darkness, I heard Morrison groan. A real sound this time, not a recording. I slowly began removing my gear, placing each item on the ground. Radio, GPS unit, primary flashlight, backup flashlight, bear spray, first aid kit, emergency whistle, knife, everything that might help me survive or navigate. Now kick it all toward the rocks. I did as ordered, watching my lifeline disappear into the shadows. Good. Now you're starting to understand what your victims felt like. Helpless. Dependent on the mercy of someone who has none. I'm not one of your victims, I said. Not yet. But you will be. The question is whether you'll die trying to save your partner, or whether you'll abandon him to save yourself. From the darkness came Morrison's voice, weak, but definitely real. Ezra. Don't. It's a trap. Of course it's a trap, Korsh laughed. Everything has been a trap since the moment you found that backpack. But you keep walking into them anyway because that's what heroes do. They make predictable choices. I heard movement in the rocks. Morrison being dragged or carried. Korsh was repositioning, staying mobile while keeping me off balance. Here's how this works, Korsh continued. I'm going to give you a series of challenges. Each one will bring you closer to your partner but also deeper into danger. Fail any challenge, and Morrison dies. Try to cheat or call for help, and Morrison dies. Try to leave, and Morrison dies. A new laser dot appeared on my chest, this one from a different angle. He had multiple positions prepared, or multiple laser pointers set up to confuse me. First challenge. Follow the red markers to the next location. You have 30 minutes. If you're late, Morrison loses a finger. Red reflective tape began appearing on trees around the clearing, creating a trail that led deeper into the rocky terrain. In the distance, I could see more red markers, like breadcrumbs leading into a fairy tale forest. But this wasn't a fairy tale. This was a nightmare designed by someone who understood exactly how to exploit human psychology. I started following the red markers, moving as quickly as I dared over increasingly treacherous terrain. The markers led through a maze of boulders and fallen trees, around sinkholes that could break an ankle, past cliff edges that dropped away into absolute darkness. Every marker felt like a small victory and a step deeper into hell. Korsh was leading me exactly where he wanted me to go, removing me further from any chance of rescue while increasing his tactical advantages. The trail ended at the mouth of a cave, not large, maybe 6 feet high and 4 feet wide, but deep enough that my eyes couldn't penetrate the darkness inside. A new note was taped to a rock beside the entrance. Second challenge. Enter the cave. Find the blue light. You have 20 minutes. If you use any light source, Morrison loses an eye. I stared into the cave mouth, trying to see anything in the absolute darkness. This was psychological warfare at its most refined, forcing me to enter a confined space where Korsh would have every advantage, where I'd be blind and helpless. But Morrison was in there somewhere, and his time was running out. I took a deep breath and entered the cave. The darkness was total, more complete than anything I'd ever experienced. I had to feel my way forward, hands extended, testing each step before committing my weight. The cave floor was uneven, covered with loose rocks that could turn an ankle or send me tumbling into an unseen pit. 20 feet in, the cave branched into 2 passages. I had no way to know which was correct, and no light to guide me. I chose the right passage and continued feeling my way forward. The cave was getting narrower, forcing me to crouch, then crawl. My breathing sounded unnaturally loud in the confined space, and I started to worry about oxygen levels. How deep did this cave system go? After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I saw it, a faint blue glow ahead. I crawled toward it, ignoring the sharp rocks cutting into my knees and palms. The blue light came from a battery-powered LED attached to another note. Congratulations, you're learning to follow orders. Final challenge. Choose. Below the note were 2 passages, each marked with a different colored light. Red on the left, green on the right. Red leads to your partner. Green leads to freedom. You can only choose one. Choose red and you both die together. Choose green and you live but abandon him to his fate. You have 10 minutes to decide. This was the culmination of Korsh's psychological game, forcing me to choose between heroism and survival, between duty and self-preservation. He wanted to break me mentally before he killed me, to prove that anyone could be reduced to their basest survival instincts. But there was something about the setup that bothered me. It was too neat, too much like a movie scenario. In my experience, real situations were messier, more complicated. I examined both passages more carefully. The red passage sloped downward and felt like it had air circulation, a real passage leading somewhere. The green passage was shorter, maybe 20 feet, and ended in what looked like another cave entrance. A test. Korsh was testing whether I'd take the bait or think my way through the problem. I chose neither passage. Instead, I backtracked to where the cave had branched originally and took the left passage, the one I hadn't explored. It was narrow, uncomfortable, but it felt like it was going somewhere the other passages weren't. After 50 feet of crawling, I heard something that made my heart race. Morrison's voice, weak but definitely real, somewhere ahead. "Ezra, is that you?" "I'm here," I whispered back. "Where are you?" I think I'm in some kind of chamber. I can't see anything, but it feels big." I kept crawling toward his voice, and eventually the passage opened into a larger space. I could feel the change in air circulation, the way sounds echoed differently. "Morrison?" "Over here." His voice came from my left. I felt my way toward him and found him sitting against a wall, conscious but still affected by the drug. "Are you hurt?" "Don't think so. Just can't coordinate my movements properly." "Ezra, this is all wrong. That guy, he's been planning this for months. He knew we'd come, knew exactly how we'd respond." I was helping Morrison to his feet when lights blazed on around us. Battery-powered floods that turned night into day and left us blinking and disoriented. Korsh stood at the opposite end of the chamber, no longer bothering with concealment. He'd removed his disguise completely and was dressed in military fatigues with full combat gear. "Very good," he said, slow clapping. "You didn't take the bait. Most people would have chosen one of the marked passages. You actually thought your way through the problem." "What now?" I asked. "Now comes the real test. I'm going to give you a weapon and a fair fight. Hand-to-hand combat, winner takes all." He tossed something at my feet, a knife, military issue, sharp enough to do serious damage. "Pick it up." I looked at the knife, then at Morrison, who was barely able to stand. Even if I could somehow defeat Korsh in armed combat, which was unlikely given his military training, Morrison wasn't in any condition to help or to escape on his own. "What's the catch?" I asked. "No catch. Fair fight. If you win, you both go free. If I win..." He shrugged. "Well, you won't be around to worry about it." I picked up the knife, feeling its weight, testing the balance. It was a good weapon, well-maintained, designed for killing. But something was still bothering me about this whole scenario. Korsh had spent months planning an elaborate psychological hunt, manipulating us at every step, demonstrating his superiority through technology and tactical advantage. Why would he suddenly offer a fair fight? The answer came to me just as Korsh drew his own knife, because it wasn't fair. As he moved toward me, I caught a glimpse of something metallic at his belt. Not a weapon, but some kind of electronic device. The same kind of device that had been jamming our radio communications. And suddenly, I understood. This wasn't about a fair fight. This was about creating evidence. Korsh wanted it to look like we'd fought each other, that Morrison and I had turned on each other in desperation. Two dead rangers found with knives, signs of a struggle, maybe even defensive wounds on both sides. It would support whatever story he planned to tell about our disappearance. I pretended to stumble, dropping the knife and falling to one knee. Korsh took the bait, rushing forward to finish what he thought was a vulnerable opponent. But instead of reaching for the knife, I lunged toward Morrison's position and grabbed the one piece of equipment Korsh had overlooked, Morrison's emergency whistle, still hanging from his neck. I blew 3 sharp blasts, the universal distress signal, as loud as I could manage in the confined space. Korsh's eyes went wide with rage. "You just killed your partner," he snarled, raising his knife. But the whistle had done more than just make noise. The shrill sound in the confined cave had damaged his night vision equipment. I could see sparks and smoke coming from the goggles around his neck. More importantly, those 3 blasts would echo through the cave system and potentially be heard outside. If any other search teams were in the area, and there had to be, given that we'd failed to check in for hours, they'd recognize the signal. Korsh came at me with the knife, moving with military precision and deadly intent. I rolled sideways, trying to avoid the blade while staying close to Morrison. "You think that whistle will save you?" Korsh said, slashing at me again. "The nearest backup is miles away. By the time anyone finds this cave, you'll both be dead, and I'll be long gone." He might have been right about the timing, but he'd made a critical error. In his rage over the damaged equipment and the potential for discovery, he'd lost the cold, calculating control that had made him so dangerous. I managed to grab a loose rock from the cave floor and threw it at the floodlights. Most missed, but one connected, plunging part of the chamber back into darkness. In the confusion, I heard Morrison's voice, stronger than it had been. "Ezra, down!" I dropped just as Morrison, fighting through the drug's effects, tackled Korsh from behind. The impact sent all 3 of us sprawling, and Korsh's knife went skittering across the cave floor. "The drug's wearing off," Morrison gasped. "I can move again." We were both on Korsh before he could recover his weapon, and for the first time since this nightmare began, we had the advantage of numbers. But Korsh was still military trained and dangerous. Even without a knife, he was fighting like someone who'd killed before and was prepared to do it again. The fight was brutal and desperate. In the confined space of the cave, with only partial lighting, it became a scrambling, clawing battle for survival. Korsh was stronger and better trained, but Morrison and I were fighting for our lives. I managed to get my arm around Korsh's throat in a chokehold while Morrison pinned his legs. For a moment, I thought we had him. Then Korsh did something that nearly broke my arm, some kind of military escape technique that I'd never encountered. He twisted out of the hold and drove his elbow into my solar plexus, knocking the wind out of me. But the effort had cost him too. He was breathing hard, and I could see blood on his face where Morrison had managed to land a punch. "This ends now," Korsh snarled, pulling out what looked like a backup knife from his boot. That's when we heard it, voices echoing through the cave system, distant but definitely human and definitely calling our names. "Unit 7, this is Search Team Alpha. Do you copy?" Backup had arrived. Korsh's expression changed from rage to calculation. He was military trained enough to know when a situation was hopeless, when it was time to extract rather than fight to the death. "This isn't over," he said, backing toward what must have been another exit from the chamber. "I know who you are, where you live, who you care about. This isn't over." And then he was gone, vanishing into the darkness like he'd done all night. Morrison and I sat in the cave, breathing hard, listening to the search team voices getting closer. It was over. We were alive. But Korsh's final words haunted me. "This isn't over." The search team found us 20 minutes later. Janet Reeves leading a group of rangers and county sheriff's deputies who'd been mobilized when we failed to check in. They'd heard the whistle and followed the sound to the cave system. "What the hell happened out here?" Janet demanded as EMTs checked us over. I told her everything. The missing person report, the staged rescue scene, Korsh's identity, the hunt through the forest. All of it. She listened with growing disbelief and horror. "Damien Korsh. We've had him on a watch list for months. Multiple agencies looking for him in connection with disappearances across several states." "Where's Callista Vex?" I asked. "The real Callista?" Janet's expression darkened. "We found her body yesterday, about 5 miles from where you encountered Korsh. She'd been dead for at least a week. The missing person report had been fake. Korsh had killed Callista, then used her identity to lure rangers into his hunting ground. We'd walked straight into a trap that had been planned with military precision." "Did you find any trace of him?" Morrison asked. "No, he's gone. But every law enforcement agency in the Northwest is looking for him now." That should have been reassuring, but it wasn't. Korsh had spent 2 years learning to disappear in the wilderness. If he didn't want to be found, he wouldn't be. The investigation that followed lasted months. FBI, state police, Park Service, internal affairs, everyone wanted to understand how a serial killer had been operating in our park for years without being detected. They found evidence of at least 6 previous victims, all hikers or researchers who'd been reported missing under circumstances that seemed like accidents. Korsh had been perfecting his methods, learning from each hunt, but they never found him. Morrison transferred to a desk job after the psychological evaluation. The drug Korsh had used caused some lasting neurological effects, but more than that, he couldn't handle being in the wilderness anymore. Too many triggers, too many reminders. I lasted 3 more months before I quit. It wasn't just the trauma, though that was part of it. It was the knowledge that Korsh was still out there somewhere, probably planning his next hunt. Every time I went on patrol, every time I investigated a missing person report, I wondered if it was him again. More than that, I'd lost something fundamental, the ability to see the wilderness as a sanctuary. For 6 years, the forest had been my cathedral, a place of peace and natural beauty. Now it felt like a hunting ground, where predators waited in the shadows. My wife Sarah had been pushing me to leave Washington anyway. She'd grown up in Vermont and always talked about going back. After what happened with Korsh, it didn't take much convincing. We moved to Montpelier 3 years ago. I got a job with the Vermont Department of Fish and Wildlife, mostly office work with some field surveys. Nothing like the isolation and responsibility of being a park ranger. The mountains here are different. Gentler, more civilized somehow. The forests feel safe in a way that Olympic National Park never will again. When I hike here, and I do hike, though never alone, I can almost pretend that what happened was just a nightmare. But then 3 a.m. rolls around, and I wake up hearing those sounds again. Korsh's voice echoing through the darkness. Morrison groaning from the drug. The whistle that saved our lives. And sometimes, in those dark early morning hours, I wonder if Korsh meant what he said. This isn't over. Did he mean he'd come after us specifically, or just that he'd continue hunting? 6 months ago, there was a missing person case in Great Smoky Mountains National Park, a graduate student researching forest ecology. She was found dead after a week-long search, and the official cause was listed as accidental fall. But something about the case details felt familiar. Too familiar. 3 months ago, a park ranger in Yellowstone disappeared during a routine patrol. They found his body 2 weeks later, and the investigation concluded it was a bear attack. But the ranger was experienced, well-trained, carrying proper safety equipment. And bears don't usually attack in October when they're focused on preparing for hibernation. I've been following these cases online, looking for patterns, trying to decide if my paranoia is justified, or if I'm seeing connections that aren't there. Last month, I got a package in the mail, no return address, postmarked from Denver. Inside was a single item, a National Park Service badge. Not mine. I'd turned that in when I quit. This one belonged to the Yellowstone ranger who died. With it was a note, written in the same block letters I'd seen in that cave 3 years ago. Told you this wasn't over. The hunt continues. I haven't told Sarah about the package. I haven't told anyone. What would I say? That a serial killer is taunting me from across the country? That he's continuing to hunt park rangers and wants me to know about it? I've thought about contacting the FBI, adding this to their ongoing investigation. But what would be the point? They've been looking for Korsh for 3 years without success. One more piece of evidence won't make a difference. Instead, I've been taking precautions. Security system on the house, concealed carry permit, always letting people know where I'm going and when I'll be back. Basic survival protocols. The same kind of things I used to teach visitors to Olympic National Park. But deep down, I know that if Korsh really wants to find me, he will. He spent months studying Park Service procedures, learning our protocols, anticipating our responses. He's had 3 years to study me specifically, to learn my new routines, my new life. Sometimes I catch myself scanning crowds, looking for a face that might be him in disguise. Sometimes I check my rearview mirror too often, wondering if that car has been following me too long. It's no way to live, but it's the reality he created for me that October night in the Olympic forest. Morrison calls sometimes. We don't talk about what happened. There's an unspoken agreement that we both want to leave it in the past. But I can hear it in his voice. The same hypervigilance that I feel. The knowledge that somewhere out there, a predator is still hunting and we're the ones who got away. The worst part is the guilt, not survivor's guilt. I've dealt with that in therapy. But the guilt of knowing that while I'm safe in Vermont, other rangers are still out there, still vulnerable to someone who sees them as the perfect prey. Every time I read about a missing person in a national park, every time a ranger dies under suspicious circumstances, I wonder if I could have prevented it. If I'd been smarter, stronger, luckier in that cave, could I have stopped Korsh permanently? But I know that's not realistic. Korsh was military trained, experienced, and had every advantage. The fact that Morrison and I survived at all was probably more luck than skill. Still, the knowledge doesn't make the 3 a.m. wake-ups any easier. Sarah thinks I should write about what happened, maybe talk to a journalist or documentary filmmaker. She says it might help other people, might make rangers more aware of the dangers. But I can't bring myself to do it. Not yet. Because talking about it publicly would mean confirming to Korsh that he's still in my head, still controlling my life 3 years later. And that feels too much like letting him win. So instead, I'm telling you this story now, hoping that maybe someone will hear it who needs to. If you're a park ranger, or if you work in wilderness areas, please be careful. Please remember that the most dangerous predators walk on 2 legs and think with human intelligence. Don't trust missing person reports that seem too convenient. Don't go into remote areas without backup and communication plans. Don't assume that your training and experience make you safe from someone who's been studying your methods. And if you ever encounter someone like Damian Korsh, someone who sees other human beings as prey, remember that they're counting on you to be predictable, to follow protocols, to behave like the hero in their twisted game. Sometimes the only way to survive is to refuse to play by their rules. I still love the wilderness. I still believe it's one of the most beautiful, important things we have to protect. But I'll never again make the mistake of thinking it's inherently safe. The forest doesn't make monsters, but it's an excellent place for monsters to hide. And some of them are still out there planning their next hunt. 3 in the morning. Time to check the locks again. Maybe look out the window to make sure that shadow by the tree line is just a shadow. Maybe try to get back to sleep, knowing that tomorrow I'll probably read about another missing person, another ranger who didn't come back from patrol. Maybe wonder if this time it's Korsh again. Maybe realize that I'll spend the rest of my life wondering, waiting, watching. But at least I'll be alive to wonder. That has to be enough.